And we're back to What About Nutrition? Steve Casper alongside Mr. Nutrition himself, David Gall of O'Fallon Nutrition, located out by Fort Zumwalt Square, out there by JJ, right behind JJ's restaurant there.
That's right, just about 6 blocks west of K in O'Fallon.
Absolutely, and of course, people, they have the big holiday lights there at Fort Zumwalt
That's right.
Park. And everything. So we're talking about brain chemistry. We're talking about things that you ingest that really do neat things in your brain.
Right, that can alter it, and the summary, like from part one, is that there are substances in our food that are the direct raw materials that various hormones called neurotransmitters in our brain are made from, and either our diet or supplementation can manipulate levels of these brain hormones, and I think it's a pretty exciting subject. So we talked about the existence of glutamine, tryptophan, tyrosine and phenylalanine and GABA before. So I think in our 12 minutes that we've got here, I'd like to run through those and the basic applications of them, if I can. So let's start with glutamine. Glutamine is basically an emergency fuel source for the entire brain. As I said before in part one, it's the only substance that can substitute for glucose in feeding the brain. And when the brain runs out of glucose, problems ensue. Long story short, you become unstable. People that tend to benefit from glutamine tend to crave sweets, starches, and alcohol. Deficiency symptoms would be cravings for those things or reduced mental stability. So glutamine is a great thing to look into. The next one is tyrosine. Now, tyrosine's awesome. A lot of folks are burned out. You ever experienced burnout, Steve?
No, big time. Yeah.
Myself as well. So tyrosine is the precursor to the hormones dopamine and norepinephrine in the brain, and they're responsible for arousal, energy, mental focus, and our drive, our desire to get things done. Deficiency symptoms when folks are low in dopamine and norepinephrine would be depression, lack of energy, lack of drive, lack of focus and concentration, or even attention deficit disorder. And folks that might be low in dopamine or norepinephrine might crave, again, sweets and starches, chocolate, aspartame, alcohol, marijuana, caffeine, even things like cocaine and speed, because they're stimulants and they substitute for dopamine levels. Now, I mentioned that dopamine was one of the 3 cats, so that's dopamine and norepinephrine. And a fun fact I'm always telling folks at the store is that caffeine mimics the 3 cats. So folks that tend to always need caffeine as an upper, it's a good bet that they might be experiencing low levels of dopamine and norepinephrine. And that tends to happen when you've been under longer term stress.
Interesting.
And basically you can't make enough to keep up. And what we can do is provide a little substitute tyrosine and raise that. And again, a lot of folks don't eat enough protein, which we've talked about. And I'm just going to re-mention again, if you don't eat enough protein, you won't get enough of these amino acids to make these brain hormones.
And usually people who don't eat enough protein are eating way too many carbs.
Right. So they have another imbalance in their macronutrients there. And then another thing can be said for folks, the quality of the protein that they eat and how digestible it is. But I digress. So tyrosine and phenylalanine, I should say, can kind of be like your natural uppers, and the reason is because they're used by the body to make dopamine and norepinephrine. Now, moving forward, I mentioned GABA earlier, and GABA promotes calmness and relaxation. And folks that are deficient in GABA might have stiff and tense muscles. They might be stressed and burned out. They might be unable to relax and loosen up. Things like anxiety tend to be present. And they'll crave, again, sweets and starches, tobacco, then drugs like marijuana, Valium, alcohol, because they're trying to promote this calmness and relaxation. But you can walk into good vitamin stores like ours at O'Fallon Nutrition, and you can pick up this substance GABA over the counter, which is actually literally a brain hormone. And as I mentioned before, the story goes that when they invented the drug Valium, they were trying to create a synthetic GABA because it couldn't be patented, and they wanted to be able to sell something that they had the rights to.
But that's spelled GABA.
GABA, it stands for...
Not 2 B's.
That's right, 1 B, and it stands for gamma amino butyric acid. So that's where it gets its name, GABA for short. And we have supplements at O'Fallon Nutrition, like we have straight 500 milligram GABA, runs about $11 a bottle. We have a product called True Calm, which is excellent. That's a combination of GABA with the amino acids glycine and taurine, which are also calming. And then there's a really cool product called Relaxol by Metabolic Response Modifiers, which combines a really potent form of GABA with a little bit of 5-HTP, that form of tryptophan we mentioned can raise
Really?
serotonin.
Now, what was that product called again?
Relaxol.
Relaxol.
And it is awesome.
Wow.
So
Oh, to get me some of that.
I'm
I'm going to get me some of that.
That's right. Now, let's talk about tryptophan for a minute. And I hate to run through these, but I just want to kind of cover them real quick. So tryptophan is the precursor to serotonin. Serotonin we can kind of think of as one of our main good mood chemicals. And when we're deficient in serotonin, we're going to experience things like negativity and depression, worry and anxiety, low self-esteem, obsessive thoughts and behaviors. So things like OCD can sometimes have something to do with low serotonin levels. Seasonal affective disorder, SAD, where you have the winter blues. That's low serotonin in the winter from less exposure to sunlight. Also, things like rage and phobias, fibromyalgia and TMJ are looked at as serotonin deficiency related. Night owl syndrome and insomnia. And then finally, at the extreme end, suicidal thoughts. Now, so one quick point, tryptophan can kind of be used to boost mood because it raises serotonin. And this tyrosine I mentioned earlier can be used to boost mood. How do you know when to use the two different ones?
Yeah.
Okay, so tryptophan tends to be more with your sort of your true depression. And out of the Mood Cure, Julia Ross kind of tries to get into describing that a little bit. And basically what she points out is that that's where you've got kind of like the agitated depression, where people are like depressed but gloomy yet agitated is what she calls it, the dark cloud. And at the extreme, people do have things like suicidal thoughts and obsessive thoughts. When you're low in the three cats that we've mentioned, the catecholamines, which tyrosine can help raise, that tends to create a situation more known as the blahs, where you're flat. You don't feel like doing stuff, but you're not necessarily thinking suicidal thoughts. You're not necessarily filled with rage, that sort of thing. And of course, some real lucky individuals can kind of have both things going on. They can have low catecholamines. They don't feel like doing anything. They have a lack of focus. But also they can have this kind of gloomy yet agitated state with phobias or panic or rage, very strong anxiety, that kind of thing. And those do tend to react to serotonin, which of course we can increase our serotonin levels in our brain with tryptophan. And then finally, of course, GABA, which is the calming inhibitory amino acid. And we covered that a little bit in part 1. But I like to use GABA in any situation where folks are really anxious, really stressed, and sometimes it's wonderful in conjunction with some tryptophan to raise their serotonin levels while using the GABA to kind of as an extra help in calming them down. And then there is the herb St. John's wort, which is probably the only herb that we'll talk about today. But St. John's wort is thought to raise serotonin levels as well. And this leads me directly to a subject I want to touch on, which is tryptophan and St. John's wort versus SSRIs, the drugs, the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So let's explain something really fast.
Yeah, like Zoloft and
right,
Lexapro.
Prozac, Zoloft, Lexapro is one, and there's a number of others. Those drugs are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. They raise serotonin levels in your brain by blocking what is known as the reuptake of serotonin. Now, that process is what recycles serotonin for other parts of our body, like our gut. A tremendous amount of serotonin is actually used in the intestinal tract. And then also, serotonin is converted by the body to melatonin, our sleep hormone that a lot of people have heard about. So, these SSRIs raise serotonin in the brain by blocking that reuptake, but tend to lower it in the gut and reduce the available serotonin for conversion to melatonin, which can cause sleep issues. So that's the beauty of these amino acids like tryptophan, is that all it does is tryptophan or its brother 5-HTP, 5-hydroxytryptophan, both convert to serotonin. And they don't block the reuptake of it. They don't block it from any other part of the body. And the body, in the case of tryptophan, can make as much serotonin as it wants and stop when it's got enough. 5-HTP converts directly, so it doesn't have that particular aspect to it. And as far as the drugs go, they also are known to lower levels of a hormone in the brain called 5-HIAA. Google it. 5-HIAA. This is another hormone that's getting looked at as almost equally important to mood and mental health as serotonin. And long story short, SSRI medications are thought to lower levels of 5-HIAA. So they raise serotonin but lower levels of this other hormone. Now, the FDA is putting warnings on SSRIs for
Right.
teenage depression, suicide risk, etc.
What I was thinking, huh?
And from what I understand, this is the potential reason for the mood issues, especially in teenagers, is this drop in 5-HIAA. St. John's wort is known to raise 5-HIAA. It definitely does not lower it in research, and also helps to keep serotonin levels high. So that's one of the advantages of St. John's wort. And let's finish this up with a little science, a little research here that I'm pulling from a book called The Mood Cure by Julia Ross, a great book that I would thoroughly recommend. A lot of this information and studies to back all this up are in there. Long story short, summarizing a couple of studies, 5-HTP raised serotonin levels 540% compared with Paxil's 450% and Prozac's 150 to 250% in one study. So it raised it more. It also outperformed the drug Luvox 68% to 62% in another study. Tryptophan, between 50 and 60% of former SSRI takers relapse into depression or OCD, PMS, insomnia, bulimia, aggression, etc. Unless adequate tryptophan is made available. That's based on another study from this book. St. John's wort is tested just as effective for depression relief as Prozac and more effective than Zoloft in another study. And then finally, let's talk about some non-supplement stuff. Sunlight can raise serotonin
Yes.
levels. A lot of folks have even heard of going into tanning beds in the winter, that kind of thing. And again, adequate protein intake. Just kind of a decent, healthy lifestyle goes a long way here. But we're running out of time. I just want to say, look into The Mood Cure by Julia Ross or The Diet Cure. Folks at O'Fallon Nutrition are reading The Diet Cure right now that gets all into these subjects, and we would love to talk about this in person.
Absolutely, and do check out O'Fallon Nutrition, everybody, in O'Fallon, Missouri, and you can find them online at o'fallonnutrition.com.
That's right.
o'fallonnutrition.com. David, thanks a lot. We're looking forward to next week already. Great show today, and everybody tell your friends about What About Nutrition right here. Same time, same radio station next week on Westplex Radio. Steve Casper saying bye for now.
Adios, folks. Thanks.